Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Fitness Fridays. All righty. Hey, everybody. Well, it's Fitness Friday, and we're going to talk about that topic in just a moment. I did want to take the opportunity to address a couple of the comments that I've seen on our YouTube backup, as small as it is. I'm always complaining about that. And Facebook. So let's start with that, and then we'll get to the topic, which is looks at whole foods compared to the isolated kind of nutrients that you often see in post-workout products. In other words, is salmon as anabolic as a mix of similar proteins and maybe omega-3 fish oils? It's amazing how little attention has been given to whole foods other than maybe milk when it comes to their anabolic effects. I have seen some research on chicken, as it turns out, but I digress. Let's look at some comments first here just quickly. I really want to start doing this. In fact, I promised I would to get more interaction with the core of people that are listening right now, because it's really just the old school hardcore group at this point until we start advertising. This one is from a buddy of mine, a fellow PhD in exercise physiology, Josh, in response to a post about the SHOP 23 conference, the Spaceflight Human Optimization and Performance Summit. Anyway, when I suggested I might go down, he said, if you go, take good notes for me. And when I said that I actually did go, he said, nice, please share if you don't mind. I'm heading down to Texas this weekend for a NASA activity. Love the topic of space science. That's why podcasts like this are so great. And as much as I hate Facebook, it can be useful in this way. I didn't realize that he was working on some academic papers specifically in this regard. I would love to get involved in any way possible. I was really quite the fanboy at that conference down in Houston. So thank you for the comment, Josh, and I hope those notes help. I know we're going to be talking about them on the phone here soon. And just one more for now from Gabby. You know who you are, Gabby. Really appreciate the input. She had made a comment about some apps versus the paper and pencil kinds of ways to log your diet. It was a whole episode on that. I believe it was episode 58. We were talking about how the government has sort of stepped away from providing those kinds of diet trackers. Really a shame. I think that was a public service. I even used it with students in the classroom back when it was available. We talked about MyFitnessPal. But in any case, Gabby says, love all the info. I do use an app. It's the Carbon app, and it does help to always write it down. Helps me keep up with my protein and makes me really rethink if I want chocolate or not. And then she has a little laughing face. Thanks, Abby. I'll have to look up the Carbon app there. I've heard of it, but I'm not really familiar. So I appreciate the comment. But on with the fitness topic here. This is from the Journal of Nutrition. It's from Nick Bird's lab. We had Nicholas Bird, on Iron Radio. He's a colleague. I really like Nick. Here we're asking a very fundamental question about whole foods versus the more refined kind of pre-prepared post-workout, protein kinds of amino acid drinks that you might consume. The title here is Underpinning the Food Matrix Regulation of Post-Exercise Myofibrillar Protein Synthesis by Comparing Salmon Ingestion with the Sum of Its Isolated Nutrients in Healthy Young Adults. The first author was Kevin Paulson, it looks like. Here's the background. Protein is most commonly consumed as whole foods as opposed to single nutrients. However, the food matrix regulation of the postprandial muscle protein synthetic response has received little attention. It almost seems funny, doesn't it, that we're not looking at whole foods. In fact, it's a bit of a peeve of mine. I have some exercise physiology colleagues who I like and respect very much, but they conflate supplementation with sports nutrition. Nutrition is about food. The supplements layer on top of the food. I'm not anti-supplement at all, but we have to start looking at actual meals that actual athletes consume in this case and what they do to your muscle protein synthesis response. So here are some details. The objective, right, the purpose of the study was to assess the effects of eating salmon versus the same nutrients that are in an isolated mixture of crystalline amino acids and fish oil, and to look at muscle protein synthesis. They had 10 recreationally active adults, 5 men, 5 women, kudos for them, representative sample, 24-year-olds. They performed an acute bout of resistance exercise. This is pretty standard fare with this kind of protocol, followed by the ingestion of salmon or an isolated mix, like we talked about, of the amino acids in fish oil. They looked at blood, breath, and muscle biopsies. And what did they find? Well, postprandial essential amino acid concentrations peaked earlier in the isolated nutrient group than in the whole food salmon group. Postprandial leucine oxidation rates increased over time and peaked earlier, again, in the isolated nutrients group. Muscle protein synthetic rates for the salmon and for the isolated nutrients were greater than basal rates, you would think that, during the 0 to 5 hour recovery period, and there was no difference between the conditions. So they concluded that post-exercise ingestion of salmon or an isolated mix of similar nutrients, at least the superstar, the standout nutrients in the salmon, arguably, stimulated post-exercise MPS, muscle protein synthesis rates, with no differences between the conditions. So they're putting forth that just ingesting salmon in a whole food matrix is similarly anabolic to these more isolated kinds of preparations. It does look like the whole salmon was slightly slower to be digested and absorbed. But again, there's arguments to be made about the anabolic response over time, not just acutely, but over time. Do you want to get that surge of amino acids, very quickly? Drive protein synthesis? Is a more sustained delivery of amino acids helpful? So in this case, it's just coming to a very rational conclusion that whole foods are really not much different. Now, you could flip this around and say, hey, that means supplements are good. Yeah, I guess it does. Supplements are quite good in this way for this purpose. Of course, salmon's going to have all kinds of other cool nutrients, zoochemicals, that kind of thing. A real staple food for the bodybuilding and fitness crowd, as many of you know, along with chicken breasts. Ultimately, I'm just pleased that whole foods and that complex matrix, I always talk about the complex matrix of coffee. Here we have it in meat, right, in fish. That's getting taken a look at. And again, sports nutrition being the application of meal patterns and timing and so many things, assessments involved in these interventions and monitoring. It's not just slamming a powder every single time, and it's good to actually get food being examined. It's not always easy. It's a little more complex to go about that route, but after all, that's what we're consuming as athletes. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Fitness Friday. I hope you have a good weekend, everybody. Please send some comments in. I'm happy to read them here on air as we very slowly build our core group of hardcore muscle nerds, if you will, into a broader base in this science category. Thanks, and we'll see you later. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.